Today was a weird day in politics, in part because of some unexpected and some still unexplained news from the ghosts of vice presidents and would-be vice presidents past. We're going to be talking about this a little later on in the show tonight, but in the middle of the afternoon today, of course, we got this news that there was going to be a verdict in the John Edwards sex scandal / campaign finance scandal. That verdict ended up being a delayed verdict and then a partial verdict and then a deliberate verdict. But the long afternoon of uncertainty about that sort of brought the news world to a halt today. While everybody was trying to figure out what was happening in that sordid case, when it was going to happen, and then ultimately, once it did happen, what it meant. Meanwhile, though, as that saga was playing out and every newsroom in the country was riveted to that in confusion, while that was happening, today at the White House, former Republican President George W. Bush and his wife Laura were at the White House, back at the White House, being hosted by President Obama and Mrs. Obama. They were there for the unveiling of the Bush's official White House portraits. Now, there was one strange thing about this ceremony and this event today. But did you actually see any of this as it happened? Again, it was weird because the news day ended up being so unexpected and following all these contours that nobody knew it was going to follow. But that event at the White House today ended up being kind of a comedy show. I said there was a strange thing about it, and I'll tell you what the strange thing was in just a moment. But did you see any of the footage of this today? It ended up being very funny.
Mr. President, thank you for your warm hospitality. Madam First Lady, thank you so much for inviting our rowdy friends to my hanging. I am pleased that my portrait brings an interesting symmetry to the White House collection. It now starts and ends with a George W. When the British burned the White House, as Fred mentioned, in 1814, Dolly Madison famously saved this portrait of the first George W. Now, Michelle, if anything happens, there's your man. I am also pleased, Mr. President, that when you are wandering these halls as you wrestle with tough decisions, you will now be able to gaze at this portrait and ask, what would George do?
Even his wife throws back her head and laughs at that one. Whatever former President George W. Bush and current President Obama think about each other as politicians, everybody, including the President and the First Lady and the former President and the former First Lady, all seem to have a really good time at the White House today for the unveiling of these portraits. What would George do? Here's the strange thing about that very, very pleasant event today, though. You know when George Bush said, thanks for letting me bring all my rowdy friends? The people who he brought, the people who were there to witness the portrait unveiling, the people who came with President George W. Bush to this event today included his wife, obviously, his family. Karl Rove was there. Colin Powell was there. Condoleezza Rice. Donald Rumsfeld. Conspicuously absent, with no explanation as to why, was his vice president. No Dick Cheney. And no explanation as to why. And it's not like Vice President Cheney is in seclusion after his heart transplant. This is him post-heart transplant. He has been giving speeches. He has been doing specifically political speeches at Republican events. He's been making public appearances and public comments. He is preparing to host a fundraiser for Mitt Romney this summer. But even as almost every other bold-faced name from the George W. Bush administration turned up at the White House today for the comedic stylings of GW43, there was no Vice President Cheney. Mr. Cheney, if you'd like to talk about it, anytime. I am happy to have you here. Please call me. It's never going to happen. All right. But regardless of that, what I think is very interesting palace intrigue about who turned up and who didn't turn up today, I do have to say it's nice to see people from completely opposed political places, right? Be respectful toward each other, be appreciative of each other, and find something nice to say about each other. It is particularly nice to see that when something as fraught as a new presidential campaign is underway, especially this particular presidential campaign, which not only seems like it's going to be a very hard-fought one, but it started off in the very, very